So my name is Eglė, and I'm going to present my thesis topic, my thesis paper about the long-term impact assessment that I wrote last year as the final work of my research master study program at the University of Groningen, where last year the conference took place and many of us met in the Netherlands. But before maybe I go into this whole big thing about the measuring the unmeasurable, I would like to shortly introduce myself for those who don't know me. So my name is Eglė Kryžanauskaitė. Originally from Lithuania, working in Berlin, currently Germany. Now I'm a bit hiding from Corona in Portugal. Let's see if I manage to come back to the continent, to the mainland. Yes, and I work at MitOst. It's a non-governmental organization in Berlin that works with cultural exchange and social civil society. And I did my research traineeship there, from which this research stems from. And then I remained working there now with the same program that I researched, which is kind of fun. And MitOst is a place where I kind of hooked up with this all evaluation thing, and where I got frustrated and about the long-term impact assessment. And that's where all the energy about my research came from. So today, I'll like to keep it rather short and sweet, not to go too much into details. And basically, we will focus on the main question that triggered me, and it's still in my head from sometimes, which is, what do people mean when they talk about long-term impact? So this is kind of the goal of my research, what I try to find out. And today I will tell you more about the story behind my research, how did I do it, and also about key findings. And then maybe, hopefully, we can discuss if that resonates with you. So my story is about Tandem. I can maybe later post it in the chat, the link that you can read more about Tandem for those who don't know. I researched Tandem Turkey project. This particular program had several rounds. It's an exchange program for cultural managers from Turkey and Europe. As every project these days, of course, it had long-term impact indicators written in the project application, apart, of course, from other outputs that were more short-term based. It indeed sounded nice and appealing, but after questioning my colleagues, talking with them, taking interviews from them, I realized that no one really knows how it is now. So people know what it is now. They still are in touch with some participants, but yes, it passed. Other projects came on board, and it was rather forgotten. There was some evaluation made of the particular program in 2011 and 12 after 1 or 2 years, but it was merely done in order to report back to funders. And I was somehow interested to check, so what did really happen in these past 10 years? How much does it correlate with the initial plan? So basically, did all these long-term impact indicators are still relevant this day? I did got my findings, it was all good. But I think I don't want to go into these findings here because it's not of the topic, it's just part of the story about the research itself. It left me thinking why it's so hard to talk about it. Yeah, so why we still get so frustrated to talk about long-term impact? So then I got back to academia and I started getting into different concepts, definitions, all the other fun stuff we all are familiar with. Why we talk about it. Yeah, so why we talk about long-term impact in the first place. The need to have the success indicators, outcomes, outputs, and whatnot stems from the, I would say, holy grail of the evidence-based policy that goes hand in hand with the instrumentalism. This indicates the need to find a causal link or why one or another thing is useful for society, so rather to evaluate it. But I wonder, how can one foresee a final impact before a project starts? Also, who should look for it? Isn't arts and culture famous for its intrinsic value? And do we even talk the same language when we talk about such ambiguous term as long-term impact? So these all things mixed up in my research question that address different interpretations of notion of long-term impact. And you can read it on the slide. It went as the follows. How does the long-term impact understanding vary between different stakeholders in a case study of the Cultural Collaboration Program Tandem Turkey 2011 and 12? I saw and I still my research as an invitation to take a step back from a substantial level of finding ways how to assess long-term impact and going more on this meta level and focus on the approach we choose on our value systems, which I think is the reason why there's so much equivocality in the definition of long-term impact. Basically, my research was based on the authors that you can read on the slide, and I think many of you are familiar with, and I tried to find out what's currently happening in the sandbox of this measuring, monitoring and evaluation practices and impact assessment field. I noticed some inconsistencies and patterns that kept triggering me and that are always present in the texts by these authors. So the first one is contribution versus attribution. So, for example, François Matarazzo suggested that researchers should focus on outcomes rather than on outputs, and he understood intervention as a contribution to change. So the difference between these two, contribution and attribution, is rather it's purely epistemological. So it's rather considering intervention as something that leads to change, or analyzing the change and examining an extent to which a particular intervention has contributed. So that's one inconsistency that is present in this discussion. Then there is an evaluation and impact assessment. So current practices that vary from academia to practitioners are merely based on accountability of a project. So it's only box ticking. There's no one responsible. When I talked with project managers especially, and it felt like all this thing is like a hot potato that keeps being thrown from funders to project managers back and forth. And it's not really helpful for organizers, but it's seen as an external demand. So it's kind of a, yeah, it's frustrating term within the field. Then there is another inconsistency here that I noticed is this short-term and long-term. So when we say long-term impact, it literally tells you it needs long time. However, in the majority of projects or programs, this long-term time frame is not included in the reporting part. And it's only short-term evaluation required to take place within the project cycle or immediately after it. So, but long-term impact assessment would require a highly money-consuming mixed methods approach to be planned, and that raises doubts whether that it would be money well spent. So this kind of leads to a situation where short-term changes are mixed up with sustainability, which I think is a fundamental failure within the field. And then there is, of course, the good and bad inconsistency. So I think I sense personally that there is a negative or ignorant perception of evaluation and impact assessment, especially among project managers and those working in the field, or participants, of course. The vast amount of data gathered during the M&E practices or impact assessment is not always used creatively or effectively and serves only as the purpose of accountability. Consequently, the value of it is not recognized on different levels but funders. So what I also experience is that there's so much data, but there's little sense making out of it. Eleonora Belfiore, in one of her articles, calls this situation bullshit. Pretty strong word. I agree. I would say it's counterproductive, not maybe, of course, also a little bit of bullshit. But I think this trend does not seem to go away anytime soon. The evaluation tools or measures of the evidence-based policymaking are only criticized, but they are not rethought fundamentally. And I think this is kind of the bubble that I've drawn to you, what is all around my research question. And I suggested that we should start from the bottom and examine different interpretations that stakeholders have about the concept of long-term impact as such. To untangle such complexity, I decided to delve into the discourse, which we all know that the power of discourse should not be taken for granted. We all studied Foucault and other authors because we know that our social circumstances are articulated the way our social circumstances are articulated contributes to the neutralization of social facts. So let's talk about discourse. The model that I used in my research was developed by Lindbergh. It's a pretty new methodological framework, and it's called VDP Triad. It's used for tracking ideological thought content. This is mostly morphological theoretical model, but it allows to entangle statements and structures by separating them into values, ideals, and goals, so V part. Descriptions, cognitive beliefs, it's D, and then the P stands from recommendations, proposals, and prescriptions. So using this model, I looked for empirical indicators of the inner thought content, so basically values. My research object was Tandem Turkey program and its 3 stakeholding levels, so funders, project managers, implementers, and participants, beneficiaries. I did both secondary and primary research, meaning that I looked into the documents, project applications, funders, statutes, strategic documents. Then I interviewed also participants after 10 years, also project managers currently working with this program that's been working, and one of the representative of Mercator Foundation, so the funder. What I found was a bit, maybe not that straightforward. So basically what I found in the official documents is that the fundamental value for funders when they talk about long-term impact is effectiveness. So they tend to choose these projects that are worthy and that are world-changing and are a great deal for funders. So they have a long-term vision and it's really effectiveness-oriented. But on the other hand, for project managers, I extracted the value of trust and influence. So application is a creation of project managers, right? So they show their understanding there of what is long-term impact for them. And when I say trust and influence, I mean that the fundamental value for project managers is, when we talk about long-term impact of a project, is to establish trust between participants, to amplify project's impact through participants' work in the future, and to really foster this human connection. So their focus is really people-oriented. So that was what I got from the desk research. But what is really thought about it in the real life, that was more interesting for me, and I think it is for you too. So for funders, it's all the same fundamental value of effectiveness, but I would say it has very different flavor when they talk about it. The interviewee that I talked with agreed that it's almost nonsensical, that one cannot foresee the future, but choices have to be made. So it's really pure justification, and they keep moving from inertia. They don't really question the tick box of long-term impact, and they just keep moving this criteria from one strategic cycle to the other. From project managers, on the other hand, the fundamental value that I extracted was freedom, but I would say mixed with ignorance in a sense. They are not planning on long-term impact. They are not even thinking about it per se. They leave it as it happens on its own. There is no attention to long-term impact per se during the project cycle, and unintended long-term impacts are way more interesting. However, they are never included in the application. There is no method for it to kind of track this long-term impact for them, for project managers, although they know and sense that it's there. You kind of have this trust that really shows in the long term. And for participants, I think it's the most interesting category. However, I did not extract the value there from the interviews. They are the ones who should experience this long-term impact. But how often and in what manner are they involved in such assessment? There's no value assigned here, but that's exactly the point, I think. It's not relevant for participants, that it's really too complex. What struck me most when I talked with participants is that there was rather big criticism towards the term evaluation expressed, but they had a really nice feeling and they were really grateful to have an opportunity to talk about this after 10 years of the day when they took part in the project, so in Tandem Turkey. They had a chance to reconnect the dots, to really see where they moved thanks to the Tandem Turkey program. They got appreciated, and I think I only received really good feedback from this kind of interview. So I think I collected during my research a lot of interesting data. I personally experienced a lot of aha moments, but I think that I did not contribute a lot to the M&E field or to the academic field, but I think I found a couple of really interesting points that I would like to share with you in the discussion part. So I argue that there are really different understandings of long-term impact in official discourses. For project managers, defining a long-term impact of a project implies establishing values that would make the project be continuous in the future. For funders, a concept of long-term impact has mostly to do with the value of effectiveness and success of the foundation itself. It's all about effective resource deployment and matching their image and strategy. Secondly, there are also very different understandings of long-term impact in unofficial discourses. Project managers include it only because it's required from them, but not important on day-to-day work. For funders, it's there and must be there as a way to justify their funding. It's a mere selection criteria, not even relating it to the strategy or a big picture of the foundation itself. I argue that these differences are really disadvantages. The interviewee of the foundation placed it in a way that that foundation makes this category desirable, like they want to stick with this category of sustainability, but deep down they don't like it either, or that's what was my impression from the interview. Project managers talk about it nicely because it's of course it's their goal too. However, they really stress that it's a mere box-ticking exercise. And I'd say it creates tensions between stakeholders and hinders the impact assessment process. And I think it fosters a systemic challenge here. What I really find important and crucial here is that we are risking a long-term impact inflation. If one promises to have long-term impact, he or she or organization gets the funding. But one is not really required to report on it because it's too long. It is long-term. So there's no control or assessment foreseen in order to check it. And I think evidence policy here fails. Funding party is also decided on the idea of having long-term impact. So basically it can be utopian. I can tell whatever and no one will check on me basically. So I think the bubble keeps expanding. People are promising more and more. I think eventually this kind of shared responsibility for a long-term impact leaves no one responsible. Funders assess projects according to long-term impact as a selection criteria, but that is where it ends. Such assessments are really hard to accomplish as it requires longitudinal research methods to be accomplished, which is really complex, expensive, requires a lot of human work. Project managers are also too busy to do that. They don't really care either. They just jump from one project to another, write applications, you know, the kitchen there. And they interpret these kind of studies of long-term impact assessment as the reason why such limited funding is the status quo. One project manager said to me, why to invest so much only to prove that this investment was not a loss? Evaluation studies serve funders to show that it was all a wonderful thing with very limited investments. So I think eventually no one really cares about this category of impact assessment. Everyone has really different understanding of it. I think I made it a little bit more clear to you now. And I think even though this status quo, the system is functioning relatively well, this equilibrium experience as a sense of crisis is starting to be felt. Stakeholders recognize the need for change. However, it's not clear who should take the lead. We need a space to talk about it where all stakeholders would be involved. I think NCACT, so the Network on Cultural Management and Policy, is a good example of that. They have a working group where they consult European Commission about the complexity of and hardship on talking about long-term impact. There's also participatory grant-making practices popping up within the field too. But I wonder if there could be something else. So this leads me to my conclusion. I think there is an elephant in the room, and we all see it and we all recognize it. What do we do with it? I think it requires questioning not only the overall system of funding or grant making, but rather taking a standing point and reflecting on the value system that each individual stakeholder brings to the table. I heard various suggestions during my research, maybe to let go of the need to assess the impact, maybe to prolong the funding period, to have a mandatory long-term impact assessment. But who is doing that? And I think I want to finish with Eleonora's Belfiore sentence too, that us scholars, it kind of points to academia, that cultural intelligence is a recognition that everything is complicated, but scholars must try and simplify it so it can be a spring water for change. So I think it's good to keep talking about it, even though there is no clear answers about it. And of course, it will not change anytime soon. But yes, let's see. I'm really curious what you think about it and if there are any questions. And now I can turn, maybe see what's happening here. Yeah, so thank you for your attention. That was it from my side. And if you have any questions, I would be thrilled to hear it.
Yeah, thank you so much, Eglė. Yeah, now we can definitely open it up for questions. If you have any comments as well, you can write it in the chat in the session bar. Or I think you can also ask permission to come on camera if you want to turn on your audio and video and ask the question. So yeah, please feel free to go ahead and start asking. Let's have a little bit of a discussion. Eglė, could you give us a bit more background of some of the work you did with MitOst? Because that's a really interesting organization. And if you could maybe talk a bit more about your role there as well. I think that could be really interesting for some of our participants.
Yeah, so basically I did there my research traineeship, where I came with the very big topic of cultural citizenship, and I wanted to research that. But I think once I started looking more into what they really do there, so project management in general, I realized that it's so far away, academic research and really what's happening on the ground. So I struggled a lot how I can be part of it. How can my research benefit their work? And when talking, I just really found this topic very interesting of long-term impact assessment. And I think it was interesting for them too, but I really felt this distance from practitioners and from practice and theory. So people were a bit frustrated to talk about it, because exactly for this huge problem that funders always ask about sustainability from a sector that is not sustainable itself. I think this crisis really showed us that you cannot promise and you cannot fantasize about these things, because there's just no point. And it should be trust-based. And Tandem is really, it's a project that runs for almost 10 years now, more. I might post a link now that I can do that. So they have the trust from their funders, but I totally understand how working with this definition, with this concept of long-term impact might be complicated for people in the field. And to answer Flora's question, the money for this particular Tandem program came from Stiftung Mercator and also European Cultural Foundation. So MitOst has different funders that they work for years now, and they have this base trust. But it nevertheless, it doesn't neglect the issue that I raise here. And yes, it was really interesting to talk with these people after 10 years, So having these interviews with them, some of them even did the mind map where they got just because of taking part in this project for 10 years. Some people really moved countries, changed life, and they say that it was thanks to Tandem Turkey project that they took part in. And I think that's really powerful. And I think these kind of stories should be taken more into account. And this is where you can kind of grasp it more. And yes, Tandem Turkey continued. Yes, thank you. I always say your name wrong. And now we have the Vaha project that is the follow-up of follow-up of the tandem Turkey.
Yeah, and I can also see how these types of projects and this type of work fits into a little bit what Stephen Hadley was talking about during the keynote today about, you know, cultural democracy, like getting more people involved in the participation process, or, you know, at the sort of base level, like getting them involved in decision making and sharing that decision making authority. Did that come up in your research at all? Sort of that distinction between cultural democracy and democratization of culture?
No, I would say not. I did not notice that, but it's hard. I think I'm still really torn apart from this practice and theory thing. You know, how hard it is to find a common language between funding bodies and beneficiaries, and how much frustration there is every time you need to fill in a project application, especially if it's a bigger one, and how much of forecasting, really throwing darts with your eyes closed, there is involved. And even though in the recent tandem project, we also, so the participants need to submit their projects, and they also need to talk about sustainability. And project managers, they don't want to include it, but they have to, because this is what everyone does. You cannot now leave the sustainability out of project application, you know, form. So I think it's funny how we all talk about it, but we all have so many doubts about it.
Yeah. Well, it looks like we have about 2 minutes left, so maybe time for one more quick question, if there's any quick questions left. Otherwise, just a reminder that we can definitely continue these conversations by creating our own sessions in the session area, or you can go to the networking area and check that out as well. You can connect with Eglė. So yeah, so I'll let you wrap it up with any concluding or closing remarks, and thanks so much for this really this great research, great presentation.
No, I want to thank for all the organizers team. I think it's such a dedication, and I'm not sure if people here know, but there are people who work from USA, and they wake up in the middle of the night to support. You are also too, Nicole, there in USA?
Yeah, I'm in the US, yeah. I know, yeah, this morning, today, day 2 was rough.
So I think this needs to be stressed out more, how much dedication and human contribution this conference involves.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we have organizers from all over too, like in Jamaica. And, yeah.
Wow.
Early mornings for us.
Thank you for that, for having us all here, for creating space for young practitioners to gather and exchange. And I hope next year we see us on the ground, let's say.
Yes, absolutely. Thanks so much, everyone.
Okay, thank you. Enjoy the rest of the sessions in the conference.